Our next guest holds a very special place in the echelon of gaming. Not only is he a Canuck, but he was one of the first people who was really publicly known and recognized as a video game writer. The mind behind Darths, Magic Chinese Emperors, and of course, our beloved Commander Shepard. Former Bioware writer Drew Karpyshyn. Thank you, Drew, for joining the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, Andy.
Right to the chase. Why have you stopped creating these great games that enriched my adolescent years?
Well, I get asked that question a lot. Working at Bioware, I was there for about 12 years, and it was a great time. It's a fantastic company. I'm really proud of all the work we did. But, it's very creatively exhausting. We put a lot of time and effort into our games, It takes anywhere from 2 to 5 years to make a typical Bioware game. Those are years of long hours, working closely with the entire team. I was never the only writer on the project, of course. The games are so huge, we had entire teams of writers. And it really became a matter of, I have other projects I want to do as well. My novels, some people might be familiar with my Star Wars novels or my Mass Effect novels, but I had my own projects I wanted to do. And I was spending so much creative energy at Bioware that I realized if I wanted to be able to focus on my own stuff, I had to step away. And I might go back down the road. You never know what the future holds. I left on very good terms, and I still have a lot of respect for everyone who works at Bioware and what they do there.
Well, just to pitch an idea, I know Bioware had talked to Disney, and they're doing a new Star Wars game. What about a Darth Bane series? How about that? What do you think?
I've been asked about that a lot too, and like I've said, I enjoyed the Darth Bane series. I really enjoyed writing it. I'm really proud of it. I know it's very popular, and down the road, I might return to it. I never like to rule anything out, but as a creative person, I like to try different things. So I'm taking a little break from the Star Wars and the Mass Effect and the video games, focusing on my original fantasy trilogy, the Chaosborn. The first book is called Children of Fire, and I'm hoping fans will give it a shot too, because I think if you like the kinds of stories I tell, I think this is something you really enjoy.
Well, let's go on to that right now. You touched on it there. What are you working on? Tell us a little bit about that series.
So the Chaosborn is the name of the series. It's a classic sword and sorcery fantasy, sort of in the vein of maybe Terry Brooks, David Eddings, those are sort of the classic writers that I enjoyed. Everyone who's read my stuff knows that I'm, let's call it an efficient writer. That's a polite way to say it. I like to keep the action moving. I find a lot of fantasy series nowadays tend to sort of drag things out. I'm never going to write a 1,000-page book. It's just not my style. I like to move the action along quickly. So I kind of wanted to write a fantasy series in the style that I wanted to see. And that's what this is. Children of Fire, the first book, is coming out in August. And, I think people are going to see a lot of sort of archetypal fantasy elements, things that they're familiar with. But they'll have my own sort of twist on it. And that's sort of the style we used at Bioware. We took things that were familiar but put our own twist on them to give a very unique experience to the audience.
Well, cannot wait for that. For our listeners, can you give us a little bit of a background on your work at Bioware and really how you got involved in some of the projects you've worked on in the past?
Sure. So as many of your listeners might know, Bioware was originally a Canadian company founded in Edmonton, Alberta. And at the time, back in 2000, I was working on a master's degree at the University of Alberta in English. And I saw a little ad in the English department newsletter saying writer wanted for a Dungeons & Dragons style video game. And at the time, I was working on my first Forgotten Realms novel, a book called Temple Hill. So I thought, well, I'm a writer who's writing for the Dungeons & Dragons company, Wizards of the Coast. I'm in the city. I'll talk to these guys. Maybe I can, get a month of contract work out of this and get a free meal out of it or something.
Mm-hmm.
I had no idea that Bioware was already as big as they were. They'd already put out the first Baldur's Gate game. The game they were looking for more writers on was Baldur's Gate 2. So I joined them in 2000, contributed a little bit to Baldur's Gate 2, and then the sequel, Throne of Ball, was sort of my first game as a primary writer. And then while I was there, they also signed their first deal with the Star Wars folks, with Lucas, and that led to Knights of the Old Republic, where I was the lead writer, and that kind of got the ball rolling, started me down the path.
What was the process like at that point in the industry for a writer in the Baldur's Gate and I guess even Jade Empire days, my favorite game? What was the role of, I guess, a scenario writer at that point in time? What was the work like?
Well, I think at Bioware it might have been a little different than a lot of the industry in a good way. So at Bioware, what would happen is you'd have a writing team, usually five, six individuals, and the writing team would work very closely with the design team and the art team, and we would get together, and the lead writer on a project would sort of get in there first with, the lead artist, the lead designer, various other sort of key people, and we would talk about what we want to do for the story, or maybe the setting for a game like Jade Empire or Mass Effect. What do we want to do for this particular game? What kind of game are we doing? And we would kick around ideas and have several meetings, and then the writer would step away, kind of put everything into a clear format, kind of come up with a background setting or a story synopsis, bring it back to the group. We would make changes, kind of go through it, and do that over and over again until we're happy with it. And then we would bring other writers on. And as another writer would come on, they would look at the story, get a feel for the overall idea, and give their feedback. We'd sort of work that in. And then once we started working on the actual game, as everyone knows, the Bioware games are pretty expansive. There's lots of characters, lots of areas. Each writer sort of was given a responsibility for, one chapter of the story or one planet of the universe or, particular party members, particular squad members. And that would become your focus of responsibility as a writer on the project. And as the lead writer, you would maybe have some of those, but you also had to make sure you kept everybody on the same page. So I don't know if it sounds sort of vague when I say it like that, but it's the kind of thing, we kind of felt our way around day to day. And, you were in the office every day. It's not something you could do from home. The Bioware writers are very closely integrated with the rest of the team. So it really is sort of a difficult process to describe. You have to live it to really understand how it works, I think.
So even at that time, though, it seems, we're going close to 10 years ago, it was run in a very efficient, from the way you're describing, almost like you're developing a screenplay for a TV or a movie. And you're saying that perhaps wasn't typical for the industry at the time?
Yeah, from what I'd heard, Bioware is the only company I've ever worked with in the video game industry, and I feel lucky because I hear stories from other writers who work with other games, and quite often other companies would, come up with an idea for a game, and then somewhere in the last 3 to 6 months of production, they would say, "Oh, let's get a writer to write us a story," and they would give the writer sort of an overview of the game and say, "Yeah, write a story for that and send it to us in 6 months," and you could sometimes tell.
Yeah,
the quality
absolutely.
of the writing on some of the games was not quite where it needed to be. Bioware was always very concerned about making story a part of the gameplay. It wasn't tacked on. It was something that added to the experience. Of course, gameplay is always key as well. You can't just tell a story. That's not what games are. Otherwise, they'd be a movie. But combining the gameplay with the story gives you something very unique in the entertainment industry. It's something you won't find in movies or books or any other experience. So Bioware was always very focused on that. And I think more companies are coming around to that style now. As the industry is sort of evolving and maturing, you're seeing a lot more focus on, integrating narrative properly. And now I know there are many companies out there that have writers, as part of full-time staff. They're not contract people brought in for a couple months and then booted to the curb.
If you fast forward to something like your work on Mass Effect or even the Old Republic, how has the job changed from how you described it for the early Baldur's Gate Knights of the Old Republic days? Is it more that you gained more skills, so you covered more responsibility, or was there a real progression in what was expected of writers in that, 10, 12-year gap that you're working at Bioware?
So it's actually kind of funny, funnily enough, the opposite of what you said.
Oh, really?
When we
Okay.
first started on Baldur's Gate, or Baldur's Gate 2 in my case, and say, for example, Neverwinter Nights, and even Knights of the Old Republic, back then, the games were a lot mechanically simpler. They were easier to do, and pretty much all of the writers had a little bit of programming or scripting or design skills, so we would often do little bits and pieces of our own levels. We would do our conversations in an editor. I don't know if anyone's familiar with the Neverwinter Nights tool set, but that style of conversation editor, or you make a little level and drop your guys and have a little conversation, as a writer to test it out. As we got sort of more and more complicated, into Jade Empire, into Mass Effect, the technology just advanced so much, partly because we were bringing in full voiceover, partly because games just were becoming more technologically advanced, and it became harder and harder for writers to keep up with those sort of design and programming skills. Now, I don't want to give the wrong impression. The programmers and designers did things we could never imagine doing, even in the early days. But there was little bits and pieces that we would do. But as we sort of got more and more technologically advanced, we focused more on the writing side of it. Because we were doing more voiceover, we had to focus on, how we would do our scripts and our teleplays, if you want, for the voice actors, things like that. And that other kind of design and scripting element sort of fell by the wayside. And there are times I miss it. It was kind of fun. I had some kooky little stuff in some of the early games that, that I put in there that wouldn't have been in there if I hadn't put them in. But, nothing fantastic, but little things that I could always point to and say, I programmed that, I made that.
Oh, really?
So, it was kind of more like we became more and more specialized in writing, and, that allowed us to do, I think, more interesting things with the writing, too. So it probably was a good thing.
Well, it ties into my next question here. There are a lot of people, you ask them, they really consider themselves as writers, but perhaps they don't have the technical know-how to be a part of the industry. That's always a big concern. A lot of, like they were saying, English majors and master's degrees who love the really, really literary games, but they're worried that they really don't have a place. Judging by your experience and being a part of Bioware, who I think is debatably brings the games that have the best stories, can people who don't have that tech know-how still be a part of the industry? Can they still get a job?
Yeah, I definitely think they can. So at least for most of the companies I know, they are more concerned about your writing skills. Now, when you get there, they'll have some type of tool or editor or program that you'll need to do your writing in so that they can, properly bring it into the game. But, they have people who do the programming and the scripting and the art. Larger companies. A small company, you might need people to do multiple, roles. But any of the sort of the larger, more significant companies will end up having, people to do all that for you. And really all you need to do as a writer is basically provide them with the kind of story they're looking for, and they will incorporate it into the game.
So at this point, it's even perhaps more opportunities for those that just have those skills in writing.
I think definitely, and especially with the increase in focus on video games, having a good story, a good narrative, I think there's more companies that are hiring now too than there used to be. So, the door is a little more open for people with I don't want to say a limited skill set, but a more writing-specific skill set. And I think there's more opportunities out there for people than there used to be. Now, of course, again, I'm sort of speaking from my own experience, working with companies like Bioware, well-established companies. Smaller companies require, obviously, people to do a little bit more here and there. You have a smaller team, and you might need people to do 2 or 3 different things. But, yeah, this is sort of been my experience.
Certainly. Well, to go right to that, has the quality of video game writing really gone to hell ever since you left? What is the future looking like when graphically, I guess, you can convey so much, and also the issues of games being just these huge economic whales? Has, in your opinion, the quality of writing going on a slow decline or plateauing? What do you see it going now?
So I've kind of looked at it as, for me, it's a transition period. It's kind of been this transition from, the analogy I like to use is when Hollywood went from silent movies to talkies. We've had some massive technological advances and change in the way we deliver our story. If you look at something like Baldur's Gate or Jade Empire or Knights of the Old Republic and compare it to, say, Mass Effect or Dragon Age, we've come leaps and bounds in the way it's presented. The characters are much more photoreal. They have a lot of digital acting involved. We actually have full voiceover. And it sort of shifted our writing. If you look at the writing style in, say, Baldur's Gate or Neverwinter Nights, it reads more like a visual book. We as writers have to convey more stuff because you can't have a voice actor giving you that inflection. There's not the subtleties. Whereas now you're able to sort of rely on more tools. You have digital actors, voice actors, those kinds of things. But we aren't as familiar with those tools yet. We're sort of grappling our way through. And I think, you're going to see sort of the writing industry maturing and sort of coming to grips with this new way. We pick up a lot of techniques from Hollywood, or we can borrow a lot from them, but video game writing is pretty unique in that, especially games that let you direct the action or choose the action. So we can't just copy what they've done. And I think you're seeing a little bit right now as we're becoming more familiar with the technology, we're trying to push the boundaries, and some of it is going to be brilliant. Some of it's not going to work. And, I think in another 5 to 10 years, you're going to see a real maturation in the video game narrative style.
Cannot wait for that. Again, we're talking to Drew Karpyshyn, the former Bioware writer and, of course, a very accomplished novelist. And we want to go to some of your specific games that you've worked on in your career with Bioware. Before your departure, I know you were working on, your last game was The Old Republic, correct?
That's right, yeah, the online Old Republic game.
Certainly. Now, it's a great continuation of the work on the original, of course. What was your contribution from a writing standpoint, and what was it like to now, I believe, write for an MMO for the first time?
So the MMO style is, again, as I was talking about, a new challenge. It's something that Bioware hadn't attempted before. It is very different than the traditional style Bioware games because you have so many people involved, and it's a lot more difficult to let players direct the story because you'll influence a lot of other players. So we definitely had to do some new things, some new techniques, some new ways of telling the story and breaking it up. And it was a learning experience for us. So in some ways it kind of felt like I don't want to say a step back, but almost a return to my roots. It felt more like when I first joined Bioware, and we kind of felt like we weren't sure what we were doing. By the time I got to Mass Effect, I and the rest of the team really felt like we were experts with our tools. We were experts at our craft. And I think you can see it in the Mass Effect games. I think, they kind of stand head and shoulders above some of the earlier projects I worked on as far as the story and the way the story is delivered. With the Old Republic, we were in a whole new way to do it. And I think going forward, as they put out more content for the Old Republic, you're going to see it become more sophisticated and that same progression that you see with other Bioware games. Having said that, I really enjoyed working on it. I kind of came in midway through the project. I had spent a lot of time working on the Jedi Knight storyline. I picked it up from one of the other writers, a man named Paul Hood, who had done a lot of work on it already, and I kind of took over from Chapter 2 onwards with that storyline, and I did some of the work on the various expansion packs that they've released, the Hut Cartel, things like that. I'd done a lot of work with. And it really was just sort of a case of doing whatever needed to be done, helping out here, helping out there. I brought a lot of experience to that project. I wasn't the lead writer, but I was kind of looked at as someone who had been there and done that. So whenever they kind of needed some help with something, whether it was helping another writer out with something or, giving my opinion on something or, working through a problem, was kind of my role, in addition to working on the Jedi Knight storyline.
Well, certainly a lot of gamers, unfortunately, were upset that they just didn't get a full Knights of the Old Republic 3, a standalone RPG expansion, or sequel. Where do you stand on that? Do you believe the story still works of how it's being presented in the Old Republic, or would you have preferred of just working on a kind of a standalone RPG that kind of harkens back to the roots of the original game?
Well, I definitely think that, what you get out of the Old Republic, I think you get some great stuff, but it is a different experience. And, they were fond of saying it's the spiritual successor of Knights of the Old Republic, and I think in a lot of ways it was, but it was never intended to be a continuation of that style of story or the Reven saga. I don't want to spoil too much, but, Reven does make a few appearances in the Old Republic. He pops up now and again, but he's not the primary focus. And, it would be nice maybe to go back and tell more of Reven's story. But on the other hand, as an author, I do feel like we had done quite a bit with that already, and especially with KOTOR 2 coming out, the storyline being picked up by Obsidian, which Bioware did not do Knights of the Old Republic 2. Some people know that, some people don't. We kind of passed it off to somebody else, and they took the story and ran with it and did things with it. So if we were to come back to it, it's not really our story anymore. It's become sort of this amalgamation of all these other people's contributions. So I don't know that I personally would want to necessarily go back and do Reven's Tale, but the style of a KOTOR game or a Mass Effect game are sort of more the games I focus on. Those are, definitely the games where story is king, for want of a better term. In an MMO, I think story can still add to it, but it is a different experience. I think the key to that game is interacting with all these other players, and sort of the end game content, what we call the elder game content, is very, very important. And this sort of group dynamics that form through the community are a lot more important than they would be in, say, something like Knights of the Old Republic, where it is an individual player playing by themselves.
The interesting thing is I've seen a lot of people who play the Old Republic sort of in a similar vein as you would of the original Knights of the Old Republic. They don't really focus too much on the mechanics that usually make or break an MMO, the more social aspects. I know for a fact there are hundreds and hundreds of hours where they have just chronicled on videos on YouTube each individual storyline, because it is essentially, from playing through the game and watching this amazing content, depending on the choices you make, you can essentially just get 10 or 15 different Knights of the Old Republic games if you are looking at it in that way. What do you say to the players that do play in that style, that are just looking for that from that game?
I think you bring up a good point, because if you want that experience, I think you can get it. And we designed that intentionally that way, to have it be the kind of game where most of it you can play by yourself on your own, control the story as you want to control it. I think if you're that kind of a player, what you really need to do is play all the different classes, because each class has its own unique story, and they do overlap a little bit. And this is where the MMO thing sort of gets in the way, is there's a lot of shared content. So if you're playing on the Republic side and you're playing a Jedi Knight, and then you even play, say, a Trooper, there will be planets you get to where the planet storyline is set and you're going to redo something you've done before. And unfortunately, that's something a lot of players don't like. However, you will get a unique character story on that planet as you go through. So I think, playing as the different classes, you can get an awful lot of gameplay out of it, depending how long, you want to spend on each quest and how much in depth you want to go into. There's an awful lot of content there. There's actually, I think, more, if you do all the classes, much, much more than in the original KOTOR or say, the Mass Effect games. But you do see some of that content multiple times. And that's one of the elements of the MMO that I don't know if there's any way around it. But I still think it's a pretty enjoyable story. And, I know players who played Mass Effect or Knights of the Republic or Jade Empire dozens of times. So, I think if the story's good, you don't mind seeing it over and over. So I think definitely players should give that a try, especially now that they've gone to a free-to-play model where, you can acquire the game and then play, and you don't have to pay that monthly subscription fee to enjoy it on that level.
Absolutely. Now let's go back and talk about the original Knights of the Old Republic. How did this idea come about, and really what is, I suppose, Reven to you? What is that character to you as a writer?
Oh, that's a
loaded question, I know.
Yeah. So, the original Knights of the Old Republic idea was something we spent several months sort of trying to come up with, what we were going to do. We knew we wanted to do something in the Old Republic setting of Star Wars, which had been sort of touched upon. There were some graphic novels, but it wasn't as familiar to a lot of fans. We liked it because it still felt like Star Wars. They've been at a technological plateau for millennia. So, you'd still have all the same technology that you see in the film, so it would feel like Star Wars, but we could tell a unique story that, wasn't necessarily tied into the films. So that was one of the reasons we chose that particular setting. The actual Reven story, I'm not even sure where it came about, this idea of the twist. I think James Olin, who is one of the main creative people over at Bioware, James Olin was the lead designer on Knights of the Old Republic, and working closely with Casey Hudson, who was the project director, who he also moved on to be project director of Mass Effect. And I was involved in those early meetings, and I don't even remember how it came out, but that's where we sort of came up with this idea of Reven, and I guess, spoiler limits maybe extinguished, but
Yeah, I
the
think
whole
we're good.
premise of Reven and the player sort of embodying that character. As far as what Reven actually stands for or means to me, it's tough. As some of your listeners may know, I did write a novel, Reven, came out, I think it was 2 years ago now. And, it kind of picked up the story of Reven after KOTOR and after KOTOR 2 and, explained what happened to him and sort of bridges the gap between those games and the online Old Republic game. But in doing that, I had to actually do something for him which we didn't want to do initially, which was define him or her, but in this case we defined him as a him. We had to sort of take the elements of him that were open to interpretation. Was he good? Was he evil? Was he dark side? Was he light side? Did he have a romance? Did he not? Was it a man? Was it a woman? We had to take that and actually make them definite, concrete choices. And that was sort of something that, unless we wanted to basically just leave Reven always as a background character and never explore his story anymore, we had to do it to make him fit in with the Star Wars canon. And I didn't really see a way around that. And unfortunately, that did upset a lot of fans, and I understand why. I mean, one of the cool things about Reven was as you defined that character. You were the one who decided what Reven was, who Reven was, and, what path Reven took. And then with the novel, we had to sort of take that, a little bit of that away from the readers. But I think it was necessary in order to continue the story of the character, which a lot of people also wanted. So this is the kind of thing where no matter what we did, some people were going to be unhappy. Having said that, I enjoy the Reven novel. I think people who like the character should look into it. People who've played the Old Republic game and are curious as to how Reven ended up where he ended up in that game should read it. I think it sheds a lot of light on that. And I think fans would really enjoy it if they go into it with the right mindset.
Yeah, for any fans who have played the Knights of the Old Republic games and the Mass Effect games and haven't read your works in the past, they're great, quick reads, and it really adds a lot of extra content. So yeah, can you speak to that a little bit about the extra novels you've created? Just a little bit, just a little tease so people know that they can get this extra content, these great games they liked.
Yeah, so with our projects, so we'll start with Mass Effect. We've created this universe, and in our game, we had a lot of depth to it. And there's only so much that can come out in the game, especially when players are controlling the action. We don't know if they're going to see everything. So with the novels, what we wanted to do was really expand the Mass Effect universe. We wanted to present an alternate storyline. It's completely a standalone story. It's not something that ties directly into the game. You can see sort of elements of the universe that are established or that are set up. But the first book was a prequel to the game, and it really introduced the universe and the different races and the technology to readers. The second book in the Mass Effect universe was something we used to really expand on the role of Cerberus. As anyone who's played the second game knows, Cerberus becomes quite important in the Mass Effect series. And we, again, wanted to sort of expand on that and give people who wanted more information, more background, wanted a deeper understanding of the universe, wanted to give them that opportunity. And the way to do that was through the novels. Similarly, with the Old Republic novels that I've done, the Reven novel and the last one that I did, which was called Star Wars Annihilation, they take characters from the Old Republic and incidents and tell you another story with them. It sort of focuses on these characters in a way that adds depth to characters that appear in the game. We don't hijack the story or anything like that. Again, we're telling original stories. We're giving people more information. People who want to know what happened to Reven after KOTOR. It's alluded to in KOTOR 2. At the end of KOTOR 2, the exile sets off to look for Reven. I tell you what happened to Reven, what the exile finds, what happens to the exile. Those are the kind of things that a lot of fans really want to know. And so we finally decided the way to give them that information was through the novels. And it's something that, you can read the books without playing the game. You can play the game without reading the books. You'll still get a great experience. But if you do both, I think you really see sort of all the connections and the depth that we've put into this.
Well, what about Shepard? Earthborn, but no record of his family.
Doesn't have one. He was raised on the streets. Learned to look out for himself.
He saw his whole unit die on a cruise. He could have some serious emotional scars.
Every soldier has scars. Shepard's a survivor.
Is that the kind of person we want protecting the galaxy?
That's the only kind of person who can protect the galaxy.
I'll make the call.
That idea of choice that you talked about a little bit in essentially had to take it away when you're writing the books, it really is, and always since has been, an important, a really important principle, I would say, in all Bioware games, leaving it to the audience. As a writer, did you find that as a freeing task, that you could make things that were a little more ambiguous, that were multifaceted, or was it almost impossible because you had to make things that were ambiguous and very multifaceted?
You know, it's obviously the great, conundrum of video game storytelling. It is the thing I think that gives games so much power. Allowing players to be an active participant in the story is something that games offer that movies, books, TV, that they just can't offer. It's a very different experience, and it's what makes games unique. So I think it's very important to sort of hang on to that and make sure that players feel invested. So because of that, whenever something works, the payoff is so much more. People become so attached to their characters in a Bioware game and the story that's unfolding that, in decisions they make that impact the story have a huge effect on them that really, really resonates with the audience. So on that level, as a writer, I know we can, really leverage anything we do and get a huge reaction, good or bad, out of the audience, and that's a good thing. As an artist, you really want to get that kind of reaction from anyone who's partaking of whatever you're working on. However, having said that, you still need to balance this sort of choice, and it is a lot more work. That's one of the reasons Bioware games take so long. The amount of content is staggering. I don't think people realize, because every choice sort of leads to multiple options, and then those lead to more multiple options, and things kind of, spiral out of control very quickly if you're not careful. We have ways to sort of bring the story back online, and we try to keep things sort of driving forward along a main narrative, but we try to give the players as much of an experience to shape the story as they want, which means, a game like Mass Effect, for example, the scripts for it were the equivalent of about 30 full-length feature films. That's the amount of story content we put into that game. And then it takes hundreds and hundreds of hours in recording studios to record it. That's one of the reasons games become, as you, I think, mentioned earlier, these sort of, monstrous financial whales that can sink an entire company if they're not careful. So there is a great payoff, but there's also a lot of cost and a lot of potential cost if you aren't careful with it.
When you're writing, what's your favorite? Are you Renegade or Paragon? What do you like to write the most in terms of when you are writing those branching storylines?
Renegades are always fun to write. It's always fun to be sort of the bad boy, and as a writer, most writers seem to really like villains or more complicated, morally ambiguous heroes. I'm not sure why that is. I think it's maybe because it for me, it allows me to sort of, creatively get this stuff out of my system. I like to think that I'm basically a good person in the real world. My characters in games and books do things I would never, ever do and never consider doing. But it's kind of a fun, harmless way to let that out of your system. I think that's maybe why villainy appeals to all of us, because it's all in there inside of us somewhere. We all have that, a little bit of darkness or the dark side in us, and society, it won't function if we all start letting it out, and we have to learn to control it. And I think this is a way for us to sort of take it out and let it run around for a little bit and then put it safely back in the box.
There you go. You're saving society from us just doing evil things to puppies all day, so that's great.
Exactly.
Well, of course, we need to talk about Commander Shepard's story. Looking back now that his tale is finished, I asked you before what Reven is to you. What is the Mass Effect series to you?
Oof, yeah, another big question. Mass Effect's very, very special to me because I was so closely involved in creating it. You know, I was part of that original team that came up with the basic themes and the basic outline of what the universe was going to be. We helped sort of map out, you know, how everything was going to fit together, you know, different species, different races. I was there for almost the entirety of the first 2 games. I left very near the end of the second Mass Effect game to go down to Austin, Texas, and work on the Star Wars online game. But I was not really involved in Mass Effect 3, so I don't really want to talk too much about Mass Effect 3 because I don't feel, you know, it's really my place. I wasn't part of the team, so I don't really want to guess as to what they did or didn't do. But for the first 2 Mass Effect games, you know, we created this amazing universe. We got to just kept building on it and building on it. I was always amazed at how much more depth it sort of took on, because we knew we had something fantastic. We knew we really liked it, but even we didn't realize how big it was going to become and how expansive the universe was going to become and how much detail was going to add to it. And there are things in there that surprised even me. For example, Cerberus. From the first game, we didn't really think Cerberus was that important. They were just sort of a generic, you know, pro-human terrorist group that we could call on when we needed a faceless bad guy. But I don't know, something about them just clicked with fans, and we sort of expanded their role, and obviously they became integral to the story. So for me, Mass Effect is something that I'm very proud of helping create, but I'm also really excited about how it's sort of grown beyond anything I ever imagined on my own. And the same kind of said with Commander Shepard's story. You know, initially it was a pretty simple story. He was sort of, you know, the cop, the cop in the new precinct, the fish out of water, you know, trying to find his way, trying to, you know, the first human Spectre, trying to sort of fit in, trying to prove himself, sort of a representative for all his people. It's, you know, a pretty common story, but once it sort of developed into something more, I think we took it in a lot of very interesting directions, and it really became sort of for a lot of players, a way for them to sort of explore deeper issues of, you know, good and evil. Does the ends justify the means? You know, segregation versus integration, how we would react to different species, different threats. It was very interesting sort of directions it went. And looking at the forums, it's always fun to see people's comments, reactions to the game and to the various situations that came up.
Well, it's amazing because a lot of the hardcore fans have encyclopedic knowledge that rivals, you know, historians of actual events that happen in history, except, of course, it's all around the Mass Effect universe. You talked about that a lot there, about developing more and how amazing it was that you had this original idea and all this extra content just grew for those, of course, who play the game and get a chance to even listen to the codex and see that you've created these laws of the universe that expand a huge, huge history. When, I guess, was it in the development of the original game, when was it decided that you're going to take this next step as game developers to make it that dense, of adding in a complete, you know, cataloged history of everything that's happened in this universe and just kind of tacking on more and more? Was it something that was from the get-go, or was it just, again, a progression?
Yeah, it was something we knew we wanted right from the start, and we knew from other Bioware games and from, you know, having worked with various people on the team, that as the team kept growing, new writers, new designers, new artists, new people coming into the project, they would bring their own sort of ideas and things they wanted to see and suggestions, and we knew it would just grow on its own. That was something we knew, and we knew we wanted to have that depth. What we didn't know was how much we wanted to show to the fans, how much we'd keep in the background, how much we would bring out in the game. And I think the fact that fans did want to know so much, they were so interested and intrigued by all this other material, was evidence that, you know, we had created something special. And so once that happened, it was very easy for us to say, okay, we've got this information, let's find ways to get it out there to the people, like the Codex, for example. And that was something, you know, we knew we had it if we needed it. We just weren't sure if fans were going to want it. And then, you know, as even people would come in and play the game within the company before it was released, you know, people were fascinated. People even who weren't on the project, they wanted to know more about it, and everyone who joined the project wanted to know more and more about it. So we kind of realized this this universe we created was striking a chord. And that's when we decided, yeah, let's put in the codex. Let's, add this stuff in. Let's make sure people can appreciate the depth that we've put in there.
Since it has grown to something so big, could you possibly think back to something that perhaps was left on the cutting room floor when you were in more of the original design stages that now, if we knew about it, would just think, I can't believe they wanted to take the story in this sort of path? It's almost blasphemy because we love these characters in this sort of way. Was there any, I guess, real big differences of how you originally thought the game would play out to what the final product was?
I'm trying to think. It's pretty tough.
It's tough. Yeah, it was a long way ago.
It's thrown around. And, some of the ideas are a little bit wacky, a little bit crazy. I mean, there was, at one point, some ideas that maybe Shepard was actually an alien, and didn't know it, but we felt that was maybe a little too close to Reven. There was some ideas that maybe, at one point we thought, well, maybe some point Shepard, gets his, his essence transferred into some kind of a machine. It becomes sort of a cyborg and becomes sort of a bridge between organic and synthetic life, which, kind of is a theme that does sort of play up in the games, but, it's something we thought maybe this is like a whole, maybe that's Mass Effect 2. At one point we thought maybe that's how he survives, and sort of, returns, he or she. I'm saying he just for simplicity's sake. Certainly. But, I don't want to disrespect all the femsheps out there. I know they're a pretty passionate group, so, I can't think of anything necessarily specific that was, that shocking, because we tend to throw the ideas out in sort of very vague, generalized terms, and then the ones we liked, we tend to pick up and run with and expand on and add more detail and work them into what we eventually put in the game. So usually by the time we decide we like an idea and start fleshing it out, it's going to make it into the game in some way. So the ideas that get left behind are usually so sort of vague and experimental and not really fleshed out that it's hard to really remember anything significant about them.
There was no Rex originally as a Hanar sort of thing. Nothing that sacrilegious to fans.
No,
nothing
that's
like
that.
Well, are there any, I guess, real elements or even characters that you can identify and look back and say were almost completely your baby and brainchild? Or am I completely off base of how you actually created these characters? Anything you can look back and say, this was mine sort of thing?
Well, I mean, there was a lot of characters that I sort of initially created, but, one of the things about working on a Bioware game is you have to be very open with stuff you've made because other people are going to pick it up and run with it. In the first game, Joker, I pretty much wrote everything for Joker. Luke Christiansen, one of the other Bioware writers, been at Bioware many, many years. He picked him up in the second game and the third game and did his stuff with him. So, I don't want to say I created Joker, but I was sort of the first writer to get in there. Same with Pally and Liara. But other writers have sort of stepped in and picked them up and gone with them. Morden was a character that I did some initial work on in Mass Effect 2, and then Patrick Weeks, another very talented writer, took over and, using sort of the template I'd laid out for him and some of the early conversations with him, he ran with them and did some amazing stuff. I don't know if people have seen I'm sure most fans are familiar with the Singing Solarian bit from Mass Effect 2. If you're not, look it up on YouTube. That was all Patrick Weeks, and it's brilliant. And it's taking the character that, I thought was a great character and just take it to a whole other level. And you see that a lot with BioWare. So I don't really want to feel like, they're my characters or my babies. I think if you have that attitude, you won't get some of the brilliant stuff that we get at BioWare because you can't be precious about your own work.
I'm sorry. I know that was important, but you performed Gilbert and Sullivan?
I am the very model of a scientist Solarian. I've studied species Turian, Asari, and Batarian. I'm quite good at genetics as a subset of biology because I am an expert, which I know is a tautology. My xenoscience studies range from urban to agrarian. I am the very model of a scientist Solarian.
That's good to know, absolutely. Now, talking to Bioware fans over at the BSN forums before I spoke to you, overwhelmingly, the question they wanted to ask was about Legion. Of like the 100 questions I got, 30 to 50 of them were all wanted to know what you thought about this really interesting character First off, how did the concept of Legion really come to be?
So in the second game, we decided, we wanted to sort of take the thread of the Reapers and sort of expand on it and take the story in sort of a different direction and, build on what we'd done in the first game. And, we didn't really see how the Geth would necessarily tie into it. I mean, there was some potential with the Geth and the Quarians, but we did feel it was a little odd that all of a sudden, the Geth, who had been so critical in the first game, so instrumental in the storyline, were just kind of gone. And we thought, well, we do want to know more about them. And I know a lot of people, even if they're no longer a threat, or maybe because they're no longer a threat, people want to learn about them. And we decided the best way to do that was to have a Geth squad member that you could, try to understand. I mean, it's not always easy. They're not like us, so it's a little bit different. And then once we had that, one of the writers from the original Mass Effect, he was on Mass Effect 2, a man named Chris Latoile, kind of took Legion and ran with him. And, between Chris and Casey Hudson, the project director, and Preston Watomniak, who was the lead designer, and I was the lead writer, between the four of us, we kind of, would do different things with Legion. Chris would try different things and come up with different ideas and, have, different aspects of Geth culture sort of being revealed. And, the trick was to try and make sure everything stayed consistent with what was in the first game and what we wanted to do in the second game. But it was just something we knew fans really, really wanted to know more about. And we thought, this is a great way to do it. And it kind of goes back to the whole, delivering that background content to players so they see what we had sort of planned out and all the depth of the game in a way that, you might not have been able to see it if we hadn't put Legion with your group. Absolutely.
What was his story arc? You touched on it a little bit there. His story arc meant to represent for, I guess, the series of Mass Effect. What insights was he meant to provide for the player?
So I think one of the things we wanted to do with Legion was to try and sort of touch on this theme. One of the main themes is sort of this organic versus synthetic life. The Reapers are sort of very anti-organic life. They see it as messy and random and dirty and something that needs to be, repeatedly culled. Legion was a way for players to sort of explore this theme in a non-confrontational and a non-shoot-it-in-the-face way, right? Like, it's pretty hard to explore that theme when, the Geth were shooting at you and the Sovereign is talking about how he's going to destroy all organic life in the galaxy. Those kind of interactions in Mass Effect 1 were great, but they don't really let you explore that theme in anything except the most basic, gun-toting way. So I think with Legion, what we really wanted was to have you see, what is synthetic life? How do we interpret synthetic life? And what does it mean to be, for want of a better term, an artificial intelligence as opposed to a real, quote-unquote, a real living organism? And maybe to realize that, although there's obviously going to be differences, there's also a lot of similarities, and sort of to give people a glimpse into, the Geth aren't just machines. There really is something more there, and just make them think about that theme.
One of the most rewarding experiences I think you can have in the Mass Effect series is the conversations with Legion. Got to ask, at this point in time, have you had a chance to complete the Mass Effect series, finish up Mass Effect 3 or any of the accompanied DLC there?
No, and a lot of people ask me this, and I'm starting to feel guilty, but on the other hand, I'm so busy with other projects like, Children of Fire and the sequel, The Scorched Earth, that I'm working on. I haven't had a chance to play it yet. I've heard about the ending. I've heard about the controversy. It's something that I don't really feel comfortable commenting on until I've actually experienced it, and that that means setting aside 30, 40 hours to play through the game. And unfortunately, I just have not found the time. And I know it's been, it's even 2 years now, however long it's been. But life keeps getting in the way. And I mean, this is one of the reasons I actually stepped away from video games was I just don't have the time to do all the things I want to do. And even, stepping away from Bioware, I thought, okay, now I have tons of time, and other things fill in the cracks. So, it's one of those things that maybe someday I'll get to it. I'm kind of a little bit leery too, though. I understand the controversy, I understand the debate. I don't want to come in there and sort of, thump my gavel on the table and go, well, here's what I think. I'm the expert. This is the right answer. I don't want to be that guy. So I'll admit, it's a question I'm ducking, and fans probably want an answer, but I don't know if they're going to get one from me.
Well, there you go. Yeah, you don't have to. Just the one thing that was interesting, because you did make comments, I believe, on your website way back when people were just hounding you with this sort of questions. And it was all about the dark energy plotline, the really interesting idea that was kind of floated around in Mass Effect 2. What was that plotline that you talked about a little bit? Just give us a little overview of how you saw that story progressing.
So that was something, again, it's not, super fleshed out. That we didn't
just an idea, yeah.
All the details, so it's, there's probably a lot of holes and things we hadn't thought about. One of the things we had considered was that maybe, so dark energy is something that only organics can access for, various techno-science magic reasons. We hadn't necessarily got into that yet. Maybe using this dark energy was having sort of a ripple effect on, for want of a better term, the space-time continuum. I mean, it sounds pretty hokey. We would have, put a little more thought into it. But, maybe what was happening, or one of the things we discussed, was the reason the Reapers kept wiping out organic life was because organics eventually would evolve to where they're using biotics and dark energy, and that was, an entropic effect that was potentially going to, hasten the end of the universe. And being, immortal beings, that is something they did not want to see. Even if, we're bringing the collapse, or the inevitable collapse of the universe closer by, a few million years, they still want to enjoy all that time. Then we thought, well, let's take it to the next level. Maybe the Reapers are looking at a way to stop this. Maybe there's an inevitable, descent into the opposite of the Big Bang, right? The big crunch, or the end of the universe. Mm-hmm. And they've realized that the only way to stop it is through using biotics. And since they can't do it, that's sort of why they keep rebuilding society, and they're trying to find the perfect group to use biotics. The Asari were close, but they weren't quite right. The Protheans maybe were close, and they've kept trying again and again. We're all just sort of a giant experiment as they're trying to find the right mix of, mental fortitude and biotic ability and whatever else is in the genetic code that allows a particular species to use biotics to stop the end of the universe, or maybe to ascend into Reaperhood and then still keep this biotic power. Again, it's very vague and not fleshed out, because it was something we considered. There was some potential there, but we went in a different direction. And, I find it funny that fans hear it, they hear a couple things they like, and then in their mind, they add in all the details that they specifically want, and they talk about how awesome it is. And that's the thing with vague ideas, or we always joke that vaporware is always perfect. Anytime someone talks about the new greatest game coming out, it's perfect until it comes out. And it's because we're hopeful. I think people are basically hopeful, and we want it to be great. And so we imagine exactly what we want it to be, but nothing ever is exactly what we want it to be. Hopefully it gives us a different experience that is equally good or better, but I'm a little leery about, going into too much detail, because whatever we came up with, it probably wouldn't have been what people imagine it would be. Yeah,
because like you're saying now, they even had to work out some of the details there. The amazing thing is, like you said, a lot of these self-professed, retakers that wanted to fight against this heard this story that you just kind of had this idea, and immediately there were notions that you had written a complete story and they had just thrown it out. And that's obvious. That's not the case at all, is it?
No, it's not. That would be that would be soul crushing if we had done something like that much work on it and then thrown it away.
But yeah, I guess a lot of them kind of used you as, I paint it like this, their sigil into battle, that look at what it could have been. How exactly does that make you feel? Are you still bothered by that in your career as you're trying to go forward?
I try not to get too upset about it. I mean, I always look at it as a sort of a strange kind of compliment. I understand, like you said, that's a great example of saying, they're using me sort of as a sigil or the symbol of what they want. And they sort of co-opted me for a purpose that I didn't really think I was being, that I wanted to be part of.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other hand, if you go on the internet, you're going to see all sorts of criticism. You'll see compliments too, but I kind of look at it as, you know what, these people, for whatever reason, are saying they like what I did. I don't necessarily agree that they're right, that things would have been, so much better or different. And it does bother me a bit that they're kind of taking shots at, people I've worked with, friends of mine, that they, without really understanding the full story or understanding the process. But I mean, that's part of the internet. I mean, you can't get mad at that, because you could never go online if that kind of thing really got to you.
Can't get sensitive on Reddit sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, so I've just kind of learned to let it roll off my back, and I just kind of think, okay, great, somebody, liked my work enough to see me as a representative of something they stand for. Great. That's, I guess, a plus in my column.
Well, again, thank you so much for stopping by and talking to us at length of all the great work you've done in the series. Final question before you head on out of here. Where do you see gaming going as someone who's been a part of it for over a decade of working at it when it was relatively in its infancy, and now there's big changes coming? Where do you see it going?
So I think you're going to see a couple things. One is, sort of this, as I talked about before, this evolution of the technology and just game designers and narrative people getting more familiar with it. Sort of, again, like the Hollywood industry, we've reached a bit of a plateau right now. I think technology-wise, it's just going to be a little bit more of a little shinier, a little newer, but nothing fundamentally different that I see coming in the next little while. And I think as gamers sort of see the industry evolving, you'll just see it becoming more mature, more sophisticated, more subtle. I also think, though, you're going to see with that there's more expense involved, which means possibly, fewer titles. For good or bad, we'll maybe start going more toward a Hollywood model, which, will have huge blockbuster titles with tons of money, which then means companies might want to take less risk, which will then sort of, as it has in the film industry, spawn off sort of, and it already is in the game industry, spawn off the indie branch, which has sort of smaller, more innovative games. And I think you'll just see sort of that creative progression going. And it's something you see in just about any creative art form, especially collaborative creative art forms. It's sort of this cycle of, big budget studio, indie, then indie becomes the hot thing, and the studios fall away, and then the studios come back. And I think you'll just sort of see that cycle in video games as well.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much again, Drew Karpyshyn, a former Bioware writer and novelist. He's working on a new book series right now. Tell him all about it, Drew.
So the book series is called The Chaosborn. It's a classic fantasy in the vein of, Lord of the Rings or Game of Thrones or any of those kind of Terry Brooks style of writing. And I think fans are really going to enjoy it. The first book is called Children of Fire. Comes out August 27th.
There you go. Thank you again, Drew. Andy Borkowski, VGS. Make sure you pick it up.